For this part of the course, we're going to talk about closed-loop supply chains, which is thinking about supply chains not just in a linear flow, but also in a circular way, in terms of seeing the products coming back into the supply chain to be reused and create actually value for companies and for customers. The objectives of this part is to understand why reverse supply chains occur in the first place, what some of the key drivers are behind that, to understand what the main enablers are and what kind of barriers also exist to prevent closed-loop supply chains from being more effective, and to describe some examples of closed-loop supply chains to give you an idea of how companies in reality are putting in place these return flows, these circular types of supply chains, as opposed to the pure linear original supply chains we've described before. So, the origins really of closed-loop supply chains comes from the fact that many companies are required for various reasons to bring back their products from customers. We tend to call this reverse logistics, which is really part of closed-loop supply chain thinking. Within reverse logistics, we see there are a number of types of returns of products. And one of them is particularly important for closed-loop supply chains, but I'll describe the other four so you have an idea of why companies might even consider this part of the supply chain. So the five really relate to, firstly, customer returns, whereby customers are not particularly happy with the products that they have. They might decide that, for example, if you buy products over the internet, the product you ordered doesn't exactly look like the one that you saw on the internet, so you might decide to return it to the company that sold it to you. We also find companies have what we call marketing returns, whereby they bring back products from retailers that haven't been sold, so they have to find secondary markets for those products. We also find, particularly within supply chain management, assets tend to circulate within supply chains. So if we think about some of the packaging, for example, the wooden pallets that we use to transport products throughout the supply chain, these tend to go from the first tier suppliers through to the manufacturers and then through to distributing companies up to retailers, but then return in a loop back to the manufacturers and their suppliers to reuse those products. We also find that there is a need, very much from a legislative perspective, to protect society, to recall products that have potentially harmful effects on people that we might not know about when we actually sell those products. So if we think about the recent horse meat scandal within Europe, where in certain packaged food we found that instead of having beef or pork, there was horse meat contents within, and therefore there's a need to bring back those products back from the marketplace. But there are plenty of other examples where the quality and safety of products might require that they are returned to manufacturers in order to protect the end users, the customers that have bought those products. The final one that I will briefly describe here, which is really the one which impacts on closed-loop supply chains, are environmental returns, and the picture you see there are mobile phones. And this particularly is something that's been driven within Europe by legislation. So legislation which means companies have to put in place a scheme to return their products at the end of their life. So for mobile phones, the main distributors of mobile phones have to put in place a free take-back system whereby you can bring back your phones to the retailer you bought them from or send them back to the distributing company so that they can be recycled to a certain level. But not only is there a compliance reason for doing this, there are also potential ways of saving costs and improving the reputation of companies by showing that the products that we sell, not only do we look after them at the end of their life, prevent them from being disposed of, but also reusing some of the parts and components and materials within those products in order to save cost actually within parts of the supply chain. So that's really the basis for where closed-loop supply chains come from. What I'm showing here is a depiction of the different possible routes that products will follow when they get returned back into the supply chain. You can see here that I'm talking about repair processes, reconditioning processes, particularly related to the green goods market, where we're selling products which are perhaps not brand new but have been reworked to sell again into a secondary market, perhaps at a slightly lower price. And also remanufacturing products completely in a way that they can be sold almost as new products again. So the main loops that you see there really describe the way that, for example, products can be repaired and sold back into the original distribution chain, maybe reconditioned. If we think about, for example, power tools sold by Bosch or Black & Decker, they have a reconditioning program where they do some quality checks of the electric motor, for example, and then resell them as used products, or even things like laptops. There is a secondary market for laptops that have been reconditioned. Remanufacturing is really a greater extent of reworking of the product, particularly when it really doesn't work, where you have to put a lot of investment in that product to get it working again. And again, an example of that is in the automotive sector, where engines and gearboxes for certain vehicles, particularly premium vehicles, if you think about old Jaguars, for example, or old Mercedes, there's a market for remanufactured engines and gearboxes for those vehicles, where customers want to keep their vehicles longer. So it's a way of extending really the life of those products. The final return that I'm showing there in this diagram is the recycling part of the closed loop supply chain, and really closed loop supply chains tend to focus much more on this part, this type of loop, which is really bringing back materials back into almost the raw material part of the supply chain to the third or even fourth tier suppliers of products into the supply chain, so that they can be used again in new products. One of the advantages here is we are breaking down that product to its original constituents, so we can make sure that the quality is as good as almost new raw materials, so we can really control that quality and use those as an alternative source, let's say, for raw materials. So I've got a few examples for you. So this first one is Xerox. So Xerox, the photocopier manufacturer and distributor. What's clever about Xerox, of course, is that they lease their products. So in leasing, they're able to control that supply chain. They're able to decide when to bring back the product for remanufacturing and for recycling, i.e. when it becomes too expensive to keep maintaining it and keeping it present in the marketplace. And they put in place a recycling system, a real closed loop system, where they actually take off the plastic panels from the products and break them down into the original ABS plastic, which can be re-injected into new panels. They put onto new photocopiers that companies, or their clients I should say, wouldn't even know that it was a recycled product. So that's the example of Xerox, and they've been doing it for many, many years. Another example, which is very interesting, rather more recent, is the example of Desso in the Netherlands. Desso make carpet tiles which are used within commercial premises, and they get involved in this process when there is a refit or refurbishment of a building, and they've put in place a closed loop supply chain where they work with the installers of carpet, and they provide a service where they can take the old carpet tiles, which are then broken down into the individual components of the tile, which is surprisingly complex and quite often contains toxic materials, and goes back into a recycling system to produce brand new carpet tiles sold by Desso, which are then reinstalled into the commercial premises that you might see, for example, offices and banks, etc. So that's two examples. So really, to conclude, what we can say is that there are legislative and economic drivers behind putting in place closed loop supply chains. They really require a redesign of the supply chain. You can't necessarily use the original supply chain. You need to include new flows, new relationships in the supply chain, and new processes to make it work effectively and to meet the norms and regulations. But it's a way of reducing cost, replacing raw material, but also winning new markets for customers who want to show that they're buying products which have recycled contents and have a greener image in the marketplace.